a couple minutes late, but people were filing in. I just pulled the mic off the thing. Let's see. Okay. So I'm Steve Bossart. I'm with the Department of Energy, National Energy Technology Lab. I'm out of Morgantown, West Virginia. I'm actually replacing Maria Hanley. For those close who knew her, Maria just recently took the position with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so that's where she is probably today. I'm a senior energy analyst at NETL. I mostly work in the smart grid and modern grid area in the technology. I've been at NETL roughly 31 years, the past 10 dealing with modernizing the grids and the concepts. So this is the session on electricity markets, just so you're all in the correct room. So before we begin too much, I'm going to just sort of set things up with a few slides of what this session is going to be about. The topic here is literally from the program. We're going to be talking about the wholesale electricity markets and electricity deregulation that's been taking place for the past 20 years. The markets are still evolving, even after that 20-year time period. Changes in the ISO and the RTO footprints, changes in the energy and capacity market structures, and the various layers of regulatory uncertainty and the unique perspective of players created by the environment. So what our three speakers here today are going to talk about are the market opportunities and challenges facing the electricity industry today. And you'll be hearing different perspectives from each of them. And Howard, I apologize for the photograph here. This is what Maria was able, I probably can't see it. This is what Maria was able to find on the internet. So, I'm going to briefly introduce three of them here consecutively, and they're going to speak in the order that you see here. They're going to talk about for 15 minutes each. We won't do questions between each one. We're going to do questions at the very end. So please jot down your questions as the speaker speaks so that we can ask them at the end. I want to do that so that you may get answers from different perspectives to the same question. So the first speaker is Dr. Mario DePillis. I hope I was close on that. He's an economist with over 18 years in electricity regulation and markets. Currently, he's the principal at the Economic and Energy Analysis. Over 15 years of experience at ISO New England, where his work touched virtually all aspects of the wholesale market, from market design to operations and settlements. In particular, he devised the forward reserve market, heavily involved in the reserve design. Prior to working with ISO New England, he worked with the Public Utility Commission of Texas, and he got his PhD in the University of Texas at Austin. Howard Haas is the chief economist of Monitoring Analytics, where he has directed market monitoring design, analysis, and research since 2008. He was the deputy market monitor at PJM from 2004 through 2008, responsible for the analysis, monitoring, and market design, and review of the PJM markets since that time period. Also worked on the California Greenhouse Gas Allowance market since its inception in 2012, and the Quebec Greenhouse Gas Allowance market since its inception in 2008. Prior to joining PJM Market Monitor in 2004, he was a senior economist in the energy policy section of the Illinois Commerce Commission, a visiting professor at Michigan State University in economic analysis at Michigan State Department of Resource Development, and an independent consultant. And he has a PhD in economics from Michigan State University. Ingmar Sterzing is vice president. Actually, my full notes are here. You can, by the way, you can all correct this if you so need to. Power supply and energy service at Pedernales. I hope I got that close. Electric Cooperative. He's demonstrated experience in industry-leading performance in vendor and utility planning, development, operations of power generation and transmission. Expertise includes risk management, electric market operations, utility regulations, contract negotiations, debt and equity financing, valuation analysis, merger models, financial and economic analysis, and due diligence. So that's, you can see that our three speakers have a lot of expertise in this area, so hopefully we can generate a lot of interest in what they talk about, and we have questions at the end that we can talk through. We should have quite a bit of period at the end. Just to kind of tee things up, I'm going to go through a couple slides here. So I'm going to talk about the current state of the wholesale and retail markets in the U.S. to provide some context for the presentations. For wholesale markets at the transmission level, the U.S. is comprised of 7 independent system operators or regional transmission organizations that manage wholesale market transactions. These transactions normally occur between the utilities within an RTO or ISO region, or between the ISO RTO territories themselves. For states and regions, such as you see there in the white, that are not part of an RTO or ISO, they typically have either long-term contracts with generators, or they self-generate, or they buy power on the open market. So that's kind of how electricity is bought and sold at the transmission level. What this map is showing is the current state of electricity deregulation in the United States. Regulated states are the states where retail electricity rates are set by the state utility commissions, the traditional rate of return rate-making model. Deregulated states have set their through competition among different electric service providers. This is called customer choice. 7 states, and those are the white states on the map. The yellow states are the 7 states that have suspended their decision to deregulate their retail electricity rates. Many due to fears from the post-California energy crisis, 1999 to 2000 area, or political pressures, and they are still regulated traditionally now. About 20 states are fully deregulated, and they have active customer choice programs. Those are the ones that are shown in green. The deregulated states tend to be those states with major population centers, so these are typically the Northeast and Texas, as you see here on the map. So a little bit about what happened during deregulation. Traditionally, all utilities were fully integrated and vertically integrated, and had a single owner-operator for generation, transmission, and distribution for power. For regulated states, the structure is still largely intact and vertically integrated. However, with the emergence of deregulation, the generation, transmission, and distribution were unbundled into separate entities. Customers can purchase power from a number of generation suppliers. The transmission owners must provide open access to the generators and distributors of power. And the ISO RTOs manage the markets between the power generators and the power transmitters, and the power transmitters and the power distributors. Deregulated utilities have many models. Some are generator owner, some are generator operator, transmission owner, and transmission operator. Distribution is still regulated at the state level by public utility commissions, public service commissions for all states, regardless of whether they're regulated or deregulated. And I'm not going to go into this slide in detail, but you can kind of read through it yourself. But these are some of the issues that our speakers here may touch on as they talk. Things like, what's been the impact to the markets from replacement or upgrade of the aging infrastructure, new technologies coming on board, cybersecurity and resilience, the changing generation portfolio towards natural gas and renewables, more assets in general, including generation in the distribution space. Are the markets driving the policies, or are the policies driving the markets? And I think that's pretty much what I want to say there. You can kind of read there, but these guys are likely to touch on some or all of these issues as they speak. So with that, we'll bring up the first speaker.
All right. Well, there's plenty of room up front here. I see everybody's like in a high school class deciding I sit in the last row. I really appreciate the confidence. My presentation, my story. Okay. I could have made this a lot more complex, or I would have tried to make this a lot more complex, but I think the basic outline of the story is pretty simple. And so I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm not going to go into club goods and public goods and all sorts of other things that I could have tried to get into. Now, there's a history of divestiture in the U.S. in some RTOs and not in others. Matter of fact, somebody today told me that 72% of the generation remains under cost of service regulation. So the amount of divested generation, which is part of it, New England is all divested except for the state of Vermont. No surprise there. And it goes to New York is divested, parts of PJM are divested, parts are not. It varies. Then there are RTOs. So there's the RTOs in divested areas and the RTOs in the areas that are still vertically integrated. SPP and MISO basically are still vertically integrated, except for MISO has one state that's not. And in the RTOs with divested generation, they've instituted contentious market reforms that are now stressing payment for performance, firm generation. I'll call it firm generation, in order to distinguish it from what's going on in the other areas, which is really firm fuel. So in the cost of service states, there is really carte blanche, or subject to some prudence review, of buying large piles of coal or buying firm capacity on a pipeline, so they firm fuel. What I'm going to just talk about is evidence that the divested generators have cost-effective choices other than new pipelines, and the new incentives from the market reforms, which were highly contested in, should drive better investments. Now, as a note here, one of the reasons for talking about this is that there's been a lot of discomfort in some circles with the fact that markets keep evolving. And the contested proceeding for New England's capacity market was one where 95% of the participants voted against the ISO proposal, yet FERC approved it. So there's a lot of discomfort with that type of approach, with that kind of result. And in general, people, there's a certain level of fatigue with market rule changes going on in RTOs. But I think it's good that the RTOs evolve for new circumstances, and I think this is generally a good set of market reforms. Now, the perceived problem that got a lot of debate was that there's inadequate pipeline investment and inadequate capacity going into, say, New England. In other words, congested pipelines at very high prices in both gas and electricity markets in 2013 and 2014. A lot of people pointed out, hey, unregulated generators, those IPPs, those dirty IPPs, they hadn't bought firm capacity on the pipeline. And in fact, they just purchased cheaper spot pipeline capacity for a long time. And then came the winter, and it wasn't so cheap anymore. But it was perceived as not as reliable. And so that's the choice that they made. The New England debate, the proposal in New England was for states to, there was like a proposal in New England for states to actually go out and purchase capacity to finance new pipeline capacity, new pipelines, and allocate the costs to retail electricity consumers. Okay. So they're saying, okay, this depends on if it's the state buying it or the electric utility on their behalf buying interstate gas transportation capacity, so just to uncongest the lines so that generators can have it, and allocating it to the electricity consumers. Now, raises a fundamental question, of course, should the public policy force investment in new pipelines like this, or should we wait for these market reforms, called pay-for-performance reforms, to see if they work better than having the state force electricity utilities to buy on behalf of wholesale generators or on behalf of the state. Exactly what's going on there is why the state would do that is actually probably more motivated. It's motivated by the generation issue, but also if you look at some of the quotes from the politicians, they want the general price of gas in New England to be lower, period. Now, the trigger for the market reforms was the polar vortex of winter 2013-14. Are we ever going to get rid of that polar vortex phrase? I think they said cold snap before it. Polar vortex sounds better. Electricity reliability, PJM was strained. There was extreme natural gas prices in New England. There were worries about reliability there in the operating room. And that's out in ERCOT, which is also a domestic generation. They hit the $5,000 megawatt hour price limit for the first time ever. They were under stress as well. The market reforms in these areas are twofold. There's because ERCOT only has an energy market, it doesn't have a capacity market. So in the capacity market regions, they instituted a pay-for-performance requirement or reform. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. And in ERCOT, they imposed reforms on reserve demand, the reserve market, and energy market. So here are the incentives in ISO New England and PJM. The capacity performance is measured during system stress periods of low reserves and emergency. Now, it's very important to recognize that this is different than the way capacity markets were created. When capacity markets were created, they took the skeleton of the power planning that had been going on for 100 years, and which uses average performance to calculate how much planning reserve you need. And they took that skeleton and they overlaid the thin veneer of market type structures, offers, clearing prices over that, and called it a market. Well, you had a market, but you were buying a historical performance. So for example, if you failed to provide energy in reserve on one day when you're close to a blackout, under the old method, your generator was derated by 1 over 365. Right? So you had 365 days, you were there 1 day, big deal. However, that was a big deal. Right? So that was the idea of planning reserves, and the way planning reserves were measured used these historical average outage rates. Now, under these new reforms, the capacity performance is defined as providing energy or reserve in real time. It's operating reserve, not planning reserve. The New England penalty is going to go up to $5,500 a megawatt hour, plus opportunity costs of the foregone earnings in energy, which could total to over $9,000 a megawatt hour. So significant performance incentive there. And oh, by the way, in New England, I'm not sure if this is true of PJM, but the penalties that are collected go to generators that overperform or perform beyond their obligation. So there's a bigger incentive yet for generating. ERCOT has no capacity market. They instituted a new, it's called a reserve demand curve, which is basically an administrative construct that drives energy prices higher during reserve shortages and reserve prices. It drives both reserve prices and energy prices up when you start to run short while reserve. It does it in a gradual fashion, and it's called the demand curve. I think that's the difficulty with administrative constructs that focus on demand curves and demand functions. It has nothing to do with the actual decisions of consumers whatsoever. It's just completely administratively determined. However, what the result is that the energy price would go to $9,000 a megawatt hour, and there's a new offer cap of $9,000 a megawatt hour. The fact that it's the same as in New England, the incentive is approximately the same. Is it a coincidence? Are they using the same consultants, or why do they end up? But it's a high number, okay? They call it value of lost load in ERCOT. It doesn't matter. Is it good enough to drive performance is the question. Now, I want to talk about alternatives to new pipelines that the generators have. This is a simple example, and this is regional. That's one example, but it took 13 years of data from the basis differential between Algonquin and Henry Hub, going back to January 2003, and said, all right, if a generator had bought firm capacity in January of 2003 and held on to it and during that period, and every day he sells it back into the spot market. So he went out, bought the capacity, funded the new pipeline, and he says, well, now I'm going to sell back into the spot market and hope I make a profit. No way. All right? The average price, spot price, is $1.59 over that period. And of course, you put up the money up front, add any kind of discount rate, and you have a negative, I have used a discount rate of 5%. You're not going to, the NPV's net present value is negative. No investor, no hedge fund, no investment bank, and no generator is going to make that decision. That's just do one thing, okay? It's one, but it shows that, so this is only one example, one location, but it makes sense that the generators in New England did not invest in firm capacity. Now, the other way of looking at this is to look at what the generator actually faces from their perspective. They try to, there's more of an accounting perspective. They have this long-term contract, and it's $1.50 per decatherm day. This is for a New England new pipeline. Okay? And that $1.50 per decatherm day is different in different regions, and I'm going to get to that later. Okay? But in New England, the commonly used number is $1.50 per decatherm day. They have to pay that 365 days a year, and it's good for all 24 hours, right? It represents a large adder to the commodity price. So if they use that capacity only one day, then they would be spending $1.50 for 365 days. They use it one day, and that's $547.50 that they would have to add to their fuel cost. If you did 50% of the days with a generator that's a 16-hour burn, there would be approximately $450 an MMBTU. So that would make, these adders would make the generator very uncompetitive in the market, almost all of the time. So the question is, could they buy that capacity and only use it when prices are high and sell it back the rest of the time? Well, yes, but we talked about in the previous slide is that buying long and selling, buying long-term and selling short-term is not a feasible financial deal. So, no, they probably would not be able to do that and be able to make a profit. So they can't sell long-term excess in the short term when the market's competitive and only use the capacity when it's non-competitive or when it's high price. So that's not going to happen. They will be selling at a loss. Now, the other option is adding dual field capability. And I took some data from the Eastern Internet Planning Collaborative. It's a big study, a lot of good data in there. And they have one whole section of the report that just looks at dual field capability and compared it to firm capacity on a pipeline. And you can see that ISO New England has by far, this took the median of all these different locations they had. Actually, Long Island that was higher than New England. I took the median here for each of these regions. So in ISO New England, the firm pipeline capacity charge is very high. Adding dual field capability is a much more rational thing to do. And you compare that with Midwest ISO. If you're a generator, well, actually, adding dual field capability doesn't make sense. You should go buy firm capacity on the pipeline. PJM, go buy dual field capability. So it varies by location. And that's it. And the point is simply that, hey, generators have to look at these locational fuel inputs and decide what's the best thing to buy or how to build their plant, and to make that decision based on all the circumstances that they find. Finally, I looked at LNG. Now, LNG, the prices are generally confidential, but I was able to get enough to say that, look at these two different years. So in 2013-14, when we had the cold snap, polar vortex, LNG coming into the Northeast, this is Canada in Canada, plus terminal outside Boston Harbor, Massachusetts. Those prices are below the world price. There's still some coming in, but below the world average price. And when there was next year, the price being paid in the Northeast was the highest price in the world, and a lot more LNG came in, unsurprisingly. That's a source for the generators to back up, to firm up their fuel. And if you think about it, if you're only using that LNG 30 days a year, it might be a very competitive solution to having firm generation, or firming up your fuel so that you have firm generation. You may not have the option of LNG if you're in a different part of the country. So this is just an illustration to make the point that generators have lots of options, and they have to carefully evaluate these options. It's different for different generations, different locations. So, in conclusion, I'm going to say that I believe that the RTO market reforms, as contentious as they are, and as uncomfortable as they are for a lot of generators, and as expensive as they are for load that's going to have to pay for this performance, it's going to drive the generators to choose the best among all of these alternatives. They're going to look at their particular situation, and they are going to evaluate spot gas, dual fuel capability, LNG, or long-term pipeline capacity. And they're going to pick the optimal investment choice. And that's what we want. So I think that the RTO market reforms give the generators the right performance incentives to make those optimal investment decisions. And I think that's the right. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks to the conference for the opportunity to speak to everyone here. I understand that there's folks here who are maybe not so familiar with the wholesale electricity markets, PJM, we've got, and generally speaking, we got a little introduction there. I plan to cover a little bit again, broad strokes about what we're looking for from our perspective as the market monitor in PJM. I think I can speak for at least some of the market designers from other markets who do it all the time to complain about what we haven't done yet. So I have 350 slides. I'm kidding. All right, first of all, a little background. And it's been said many times that the wholesale electricity market is deregulated, at least in parts of the country. And I don't think that's necessarily a fair description. It has been restructured. It is still a very heavily regulated industry. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they still have final say on just about everything. How the capacity market's going to look, how LLP is formed, whether or not you're looking at 5-minute formation of prices, you're looking at 15 minutes, they get to approve a lot of things. Whether or not, what version of the regulation market looks like, a very small market, can be the most complicated market in the world, and it is the PJM market. That was based on trying to fit a market design into what the commission required. Even though we have competition in that market, the design, the idea of property rights, what your obligations are all defined by the regulated system. What we do have, though, is with the restructuring, is we're trying to harness competitive pressure so that we can get just and reasonable rates. So you go back to the Federal Power Act. The Federal Power Act says competitive markets provide just and reasonable rates. Okay, so you get a market result out of a competitive marketplace, we can walk away and say everything's good. Prior to that, it was cost of service. So whatever we got approved was just and reasonable. Now we're saying, look, we're going to try to do something a little more flexible. There's a caveat, however. You open up a market where you have these competitive pressures. You need to make sure that the market is competitive. If the market is not competitive, you get the market results out of that, it must not be just and reasonable. That's where I come in. The market monitoring effort, part of market design. And it's trying to make sure to the extent that we have these markets that are designed to send efficient signals to the marketplace do result in competitive outcomes. And to the extent that provide these competitive outcomes, we can go and say we have just and reasonable rates. The basic idea here is we're trying to replace the cost of service model. So what's wrong with the cost of service model? A lot of things. So if you make a mistake in the cost of service, it's very difficult to get rid of whatever that mistake was. It tends to linger around. So if you have a nuclear power plant that doesn't make any sense, doesn't make any sense. But they still have a rate base. Maybe they stopped building that nuclear power plant at some point. Maybe they put a natural gas plant on top of it, a combined cycle. It happened in Michigan. It's the most expensive combined cycle planet in the world. Or the rate base. Can't do anything about it. The idea here is that what are you doing with the risk? Under the rate of return approach, the customers have almost all the risk. Right? The load has almost all the risk. It was a mistake made. The objective here with the restructuring, not the regulation, was to start shifting some of that risk to the people making these proposals. I'm going to build a power plant. Knock yourself out. Hope you fun. And But you still have to have a market that supports all that. And that's part of what I'll be talking about today. But the idea is starting to shift things. It doesn't mean there isn't risk on the consumer side. There is still risk. You can have a high price in the middle of the winter. We had that in the polar vortex, or if you want to call it a cold snap, I think we ask. All right, so you have prices go way up. Some people are exposed to that. Not everyone. Most people had fixed rates. But if you didn't have a fixed rate, you could have been pretty surprised when you saw your bill come in if you weren't paying attention about what the prices were. So it's not riskless. But what it does is it takes one of the biggest components of risk, which is the management and development and growth of the grid, and puts a good portion of that on the people who are going to profit from providing the services. And it's an important innovation. One of the things that is the biggest challenge, something that's been mentioned, it's going to be mentioned again on this panel, is the idea that this market is very unique. Any other market in the world. If you see a system that requires supply must equal demand at all times, other than this one, electricity markets, I like to hear it. Because this one we have to have supply equal demand. Even when things get really bad, supply has to equal demand. Even if they have to come in and say, you know what, we have to dump load, that's like the emergency situation. You don't want that. You don't want that scenario. There's a lot of political pressure in electricity markets that never, ever, ever, ever have that happen. People lose their jobs, heads roll, things go, and you have huge investigations. You do not want that scenario to happen. So what do you need to do? You need to design a competitive pressured market that sustains excess capacity. Lots of excess capacity. Now, how do you do that? It's like a public good. It's floating around there. And you want to pay me, I hope, to have a generator floating around doing nothing, or I'm not going to build it. Right? Because I need excess capacity. There's some units that, at least historically, don't run very much. And so, and they've always, under the rate of return regulation, they were needed to maintain the system. They're maybe a part of the system where the transmission grid isn't that strong, it's sitting there. Okay, maintained under regulation. Now we have to have a market design that sustains that. Recognizes the value of this unit in the middle of nowhere, collecting dust, has some value to people because of supply greater than demand must be maintained. One of the things we always talk about in these markets is they're so administrative. They are. It's not really a dirty word though. Because this idea that supply must be greater than demand was an administrative choice. We could have blackouts, but again, you can never, never, never do that. Who says that? Politicians and policymakers. Heads will roll. So you have to have a design that sustains this. So a big challenge. Transmission still cost of service. Order 1000 was an effort to open the transmission project development to competition. Jury's still out on that. It's a great idea. We've got a lot of work to do to get that, because right now the local transmission companies have all the cards in terms of information. It's very difficult for this portion of the market to be transparent. Right now, there aren't really mechanisms in the marketplace, because you want to talk about a challenge, for generation and transmission generally to directly compete in the development process. It's something you guys are thinking about big projects to do for research. Think about that one. All right, so what makes up good market design? I think these things make up good market design, really. And I'm looking forward to the discussion if there's any disagreement. One of the things you need to do is minimize barriers to entry and exit. Electricity industry is one of the hardest markets to actually get into. Generation location, very hard to do. Not in my backyard. You want to build a transmission line to get access to someone else? I don't want it. I want the prices to be low, but I don't want to see the generator, and I don't want to see the transmission line. So it's kind of a hard place to go. The other thing that we introduced, though, going back to an earlier point, is the ability to exit. So one of the things we've noted, and we will note, I'm sure it's come up several times during this conference, is coal plants are leaving. Under regulated rate of return, they can stick around forever. Under regulated rate of return, if you have a nuclear power plant in your combined cycle basement, it sticks around forever. Here, if you're not economic, the idea behind the market design is you get out. The stockholders take some of that, right? And say that was a bad bet, didn't make it, so we don't have to keep paying for that. That's an exit. One of the other things too is that we need to promote flexibility and resilience. What do I mean by that? One of the things we really want to avoid, and it's hard to do, is to have favoritism in the technologies that we select. If you have something in mind, like you want flexible resources, have a market that rewards flexible resources. Don't say, I think only batteries are flexible, and therefore I'm going to provide a subsidy to just batteries and nothing else. Batteries are flexible. They can be useful, but open it up. So if someone else says, you know what, I just did something special with my hydro plant, it's very flexible now. Welcome to the club. You're in the party now. You're going to also get a benefit. You want that flexibility because we can't right now. Look at all the changes that have happened in the last 10 years in terms of technology. How are you going to predict the winner? Everything looks really certain right now, doesn't it? Right? Solar, wind, some combined cycles, and some batteries. 5 years from now, I think we'll be talking about something else. I don't know what it is. I'll be making a lot more money if I do that. So that's always out there. It's always at risk. But if you create the market that incents the things that you want, you'll get them. If you create a market that incents the wrong thing, you'll get those too. So the idea is you want to make sure that you're not picking the favorites. Also, one of the things that is consistently problematic with electricity markets is the ability of consumers to participate directly. If I drive by a gas station and the prices are really high, I can keep on going, assuming I have a little gas left, and go to the next gas station, which is a lower price. I can actually make a decision on the margin. I can make a decision about, hey, you know what, the gas prices seem high in the last few months. Maybe I'll buy a more fuel-efficient car. I can make choices which affect my consumption. Electricity markets should be similar to that, where you can make decisions based on some sort of price. We don't have that yet. We've got a lot of crutches that we use to try to get at that. They largely have led to very inefficient decisions that we're still paying for. I'll get a little bit later. Good market design to provide efficient price signals, facilitate informed decision-making by disseminating price data and information. You want to know where to build a plant, and you want to know where not to build a factory. Those are important pieces of information you should have in terms of your energy costs. The more transparent you can make your market, the better off your investment decisions will be for everything. That's on the load and the generation side. This causes a lot of fistfights depending on the market you look at. Good market design, remember, going back to what the Federal Power Act says, you need competitive markets for just and reasonable rates. And so one of the questions is, well, how about we have market power and sometimes make these things sustainable? Good market design, and these are very administrative markets, I would argue, you do not need market power to sustain markets if you design them well. And how do you get to that? Well, some things have been mentioned. You get demand curves, which are administrative. The whole thing's regulated. You have demand curves that represent in the marketplace what people want. Never, ever, ever have an outage. Don't ever have the system go dark. You have to then say, how do I incorporate that into a market design? It's administrative, but you have to design it around that idea. Any other market in the world, you go short, you might have some high prices, people forego consumption, blackout, and then you move on. This market, the decision is made for policymakers not to do that. And so one aspect of that to make sure you have enough money to sustain the market is that you identify all the value, all the vectors of value that different providers are giving you. They provide you with energy, maybe they provide you with regulation service, which is important. It goes into making sure the lights stay on. There's real-time reserves. How do you value those? Go optimize. And then, how do you generally, you can do it through real-time reserves, how do you sustain the excess capability? And there's a few models that are floating out there. So let's talk a little about maintaining reserves. I think it's going to be a conversation we're going to have through this panel. You want to reflect the fact that if you never, ever, ever, ever want to have an outage, and the fact that the other part of the problem is someone else buys a lot of insurance, and that they have a lot of excess reserves, and you don't, and you're on an integrated system, you can lean on your friend. Okay. So one of the things that we were growing off of installing the vapors, we have a lot of markets that were vertically integrated for the longest period of time. They have built a lot of capacity. And we've been coasting off of that through the markets You want to make sure you recognize that and say, look, we need to have a market that's sustainable going forward. How do you recognize the value that this excess capacity has provided and how you sustain it? What are the things to do in an energy shortage pricing? That's where we have these anchors and reserves. Is that one, differentiate between market power and shortage. You want to be able to measure the reserves, which actually is much harder than it sounds. You want prices that are consistent with dispatch everywhere, which means you need to have the dispatch consistent with least cost commitment based on transmission constraints and other constraints you have in the system. And then, if you have an energy-only market, there's no such thing really, because it's actually an administrated market. Usually you'll have price floors and things like that happen during a scarcity event. You'll have penalty factors which have been identified, which will enter into the energy price when you start running shorter reserves. These are all factors that go into it. One of the challenges you face is how do you get the price level right, the duration right, so you get more investment, enough investment that you maintain your supply must be greater than demand. That's going to keep you from never, ever, ever having an outage. It's actually very difficult to do, and so you'll have to do adjustments on that. The other one, which is also difficult to do, is setting up a working, functional, and good capacity market. And PJM has a capacity market, had a capacity market, now is working on a new capacity market. So based on performance requirements. And the PJM